Welcome to Shakin, where we provide the platform for entrepreneurs and thought leaders to share their stories in order to hopefully influence others to get out of the rat race and chase their own dreams. If you have any recommendations for guests or questions that you want to be asked, please don't hesitate to reach out. Anyways, if you enjoy the podcast, please like, comment, subscribe, and share in order to keep the podcast growing. Otherwise, I'm your host, Jack Moran, and this is Shakin' Hands. If you're looking for business mentorship, I have a place where you can get feedback on your unique personal development and business growth challenges. Over the last year, I've brought together a group of impact-driven thought leaders where we meet every single day to discuss psychology, communication, mindset, and business case studies. We have people who have made millions of dollars, lost millions of dollars, Harvard MBAs, and new entrepreneurs like you and I. Entrepreneurship can be lonely, so if you're looking for a support system, please follow the link in the description below for some more information. Are you from Panama originally?
Yeah, born and raised.
Nice.
Yeah.
What does your business do?
I'm in Fintech, so mainly I work in building payments infrastructure for financial entities, startups, crypto companies. We're mostly focused on card issuing, so essentially like small banks or a fintech that wants to issue cards but has no idea how to, or it's too expensive to do it from the ground up. Essentially, I provide a SaaS solution that makes it easy for them, and essentially, anyone can be a card issuer with me, essentially, right? So I serve banks, lenders, retailers, crypto exchanges, payment gateways. It's like a whole variety of different clients, but yeah. Been doing that for full time now for about 5 years now.
Well, yeah. Are they like essentially? It's like a company like, I don't really know how the card business works, but is it like a company like Visa or something is like white labeling their financial product?
Yeah. So I have a MasterCard license essentially, so that allows me to sponsor third party entities under, let's say, my umbrella, if that makes sense. I guess examples in the US would be like Stripe, but the product that they have called Treasury, for example, that's more for like banking as a service. That's really similar to what I do. Companies like Lithic, for example, in the US, Unit, Marqeta, Marqeta does more processing, not like the whole package. But yeah, that's kind of like similar companies, at least US examples. That I can give you. What I did was kind of tropicalize that model and placed it in Panama, not just for the local market, but I guess my key differentiator really is about serving cross-border business models. So what that means is using Panama as a base, but serving clients regionally with US-based accounts, US-based cards, like in terms of dollars, right? So since in Panama everything works with US dollars, everything that I operate is US dollar based. So if you're like a crypto exchange that operates, in 15 countries across LATAM, and you really want to offer like a crypto card, it makes sense to have a dollar based card underneath that, just because of like, FX rates between crypto and dollar, right? Like you want to be able to, let's say, settle the transaction. Like if you're paying, a coffee with Bitcoin, at the end of the day, I'm the one settling dollars to Starbucks, right? If that makes sense. So the game there is like for the crypto exchange to obviously do the conversion on real time and then still pay me in dollars so I can settle the merchant, right? So that's kind of the benefits that I offer. And with that, you have like companies like in the remittance space, obviously crypto, stablecoin, which is getting like a lot of momentum now. But also like international financial entities that, want to give like an international card, US dollar based with like good acceptance, right? Like, if you're a high profile client, you want to, let's say, have a card that's going to work in Europe or when you're backpacking in Vietnam or whatever, right? So essentially that's a lot of what we do. It's like cards that work really well, like across geographically. using Panama as a base.
So if someone is using a Bitcoin card, but then it's re-exchanging into dollars, why wouldn't they just use dollars?
It depends, right? Because like you do have a big economy in crypto today, and you have a lot of people that store wealth in crypto. And people who are big in crypto don't often like to liquidate those positions to operate in like on a daily basis with dollars, right? Or whatever currency that they're in. So this is a way of like easier access of not having to, essentially liquidate how many Ethereum, Bitcoin, whatever you have. And you can just use it real time, because at the end of the day, like a lot of people in the space are hedging on a daily basis, right? And if they were to like off ramp that money, essentially they would have to take like, 3 months of expenses out in a single day. But like, Bitcoin can be 90, then it can be 100, and like he lost that opportunity, right?
Right, that makes sense.
So that, I guess that's a little bit of the sense there. And more you're seeing crypto being used for like international payments and these sort of things. And this is just like a way of like bridging a lot of that, let's say Web3 kind of ecosystem and everything that's running on blockchain right now, integrated back to the banking system. Because at the end of the day, like, you can't fully like bypass the financial system. So I guess for me, in a way, it's like, how do I become the bridge for most, or like some of these use cases, right? I think that's where a lot of value lies today in doing those sort of things.
So I am like completely foreign to Bitcoin. I've never owned
Okay.
any. I don't really understand it very well. I kind of like understand the value. To me, it's I don't like that it's not asset backed, but
Yeah.
then there's people that have a million reasons why it's still valuable. Like, what is your synopsis on Bitcoin? What do you think the potential is? Are you for it or against it?
Yeah.
You don't really care.
To be honest, man, like I'm not the biggest crypto head, to be honest. I do own crypto. I'm not huge on it in the sense of like I'm involved in trading on a daily basis and things like that. To me, it's really more about the opportunities it gives to operate or change how, let's say, regular businesses or just transactions can benefit from the use of the technology.
In like what example?
So a good example of this is remittances.
Yeah, you mentioned that before. I don't know what that
Yeah.
is either.
So like basically like sending money from one country to the other. Like,
Gotcha.
let's say, you're living in Panama. Well, this is maybe not the best example, but let's say you were like a foreign exchange kid, right? Like living in Panama, and then your parents in the US need to send you money.
Here, I can only pull $250 a day, which is very inconvenient.
In what, in like an ATM?
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's a good example. So let's say you need to send money, from the US to here, and you have a US card and you only have access to, $250 in cash through an ATM. If you want to send that money instantly and without you having, let's say, an account today in Panama where you can wire transfer that money in, right? So like a bigger sum of money. Essentially, you would have to go through a remittance player. So like a MoneyGram, Western Union, Wise, right? Like all these sorts of different services. Essentially, how that works is, let's say your friend is sending $1,000 to you through a Western Union branch, and you go to a Western Union branch here in Panama and withdraw that money. Essentially, what's happening behind that is that Western Union essentially has to like have a lot of money in both places to be able to receive and then send, collect, and then send to the US. So moving money like that is very costly. Not just from an opportunity cost in terms of how you manage it, but it's a lot of operational heavy, right? Like getting cash in, getting into the bank, reconciling it, sending it, right? Like there's whole teams just looking at how much money Western Union has on a daily basis and like how to cover the positions, right? It's almost like a hedge fund if you think about it, because they're looking at like FX rates and all these sort of things. I don't want to make it super complicated for you.
Trying to track.
No worries. But what this type of like technologies allow is for instant transfer of funds from, let's say, one wallet to the other at a cost that's, very almost insignificant, right? Um, when it, so like a very simple way of seeing it is essentially, if that friend pays Western Union cash and Western Union is doing all that transaction in the back using something like a stable coin, which is, USDC, USDT, and that stable coin gets cleared by, let's say, a partner like me that serves Western Union or whoever, you could receive that money instantly at like a fraction of the cost that otherwise would cost you, because obviously Western Union has to make margins, right, on that money transfer. So essentially this is a lot of what's happening, and it's a very clear example. The other is like for security and things like that. So essentially, I think the benefits really are in terms of how you can automatize a lot of these things, with less operational cost, where it can be used at, something as simple as like, a friend sending you money, let's say $50 or whatever overseas, all the way to like very larger transactions, right? Where you have, banking credit involved, or like millions of dollars being cleared from one company to the other for, let's say, an inventory exchange or a purchase, or, essentially a boat crossing through the canal, right? Like what, and I'm going kind of on a crazy example here, but essentially, you can make transactions cheaper and faster, with that technology. I guess that's kind of like the main thesis behind why a lot of these companies are adapting these solutions and trying to like stay competitive within the business models that exist today, because like people are creating value with these things every day, right? Like I'm just one guy in Panama, kind of in the middle of this ecosystem, but like guys like me that know a lot more about this than me, there's hundreds of thousands of them in the world, in, all the way from Asia to the US to Europe, like building these things out with teams and everyone that's like, this is their lives, right? And they're dedicated to this. So it's really about staying up to date, and we will see a world eventually where a lot of these financial like transactions and the cost of running them is coming down, essentially. And that's where I see a lot of potential, and that's why I'm also like involved in it, because if you're not, then you're missing out, right?
Yeah.
And eventually it will like bite you in the ass.
The people, now that these wire transactions have the potential to decrease that cost for the wire transaction, whoever's making that margin before on the wire transaction must be pretty pissed off.
Yeah, that's probably the Swift network, which has been dominating banking transactions since, I don't know, even before I was born.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they're probably already, creating or adapting or buying companies that can, provide some of these this value to them, or maybe like change a little bit their business model. I'm sure this is happening. I'm not sure of an like specific example now, but this is a reality, man. Like everyone in the banking space, even the fintech space, like we're all seeing transformational change. And I think everyone in the tech space overall is feeling the pressure of having to do more with less. And what I mean by that is, things like AI, things like the venture space being kind of going through a transformation of its own. The valuations weren't the same that it were, 5 years ago. And now AI is making everything cheaper. So like it's really about, having the right team, small team, not hiring a bunch of people, and then still getting to like millions of recurring revenue with a
Their
team of like,
systems and
exactly. So it's really more about like building computational capital rather than like operations, teams, and all these sort of things. And it's crazy, man. Like it's happening right now, and everyone is kind of in that like arms race, if it
Yeah.
makes sense.
You said before that you had to tropicalize your card. What does that mean?
Oof. Well, this is a usual term that Latin Americans like to use when you take certain models that let's say, have been proven somewhat successful in other, let's say, more mature markets, and then you bring it down and apply it to emerging markets. In this case, Latin America for the tropicalization term. But essentially what that means is I had to adapt that product into working with local regulation and how the market overall works, right? Like, to be honest, I knew that I was starting in a country where it wasn't as technologically developed, in terms of even like people that work in companies that know how to integrate these technologies. Even though it's like super simple for anyone to integrate our services, the reality is that you have to break down a lot of like not just regulatory barriers, but also how people think of it, how people become less risk averse into like venturing into these sort of things. So it's really about that, right? Like it's making something that has worked well in other countries and then adapt it for it to make sense and for it to work well in the country that you're operating in, essentially.
What are the limitations here in Panama versus like the US? What are those differences?
Well, first of all, is we don't have a fintech law. So for me, I knew that I was taking a big risk when I started. And I had to do everything really well from the beginning. Like, since there was no path in terms of how to follow rules, because at the end of the day, like, you are providing financial services in some way or the other, right? Not directly, but in a way indirectly with partner banks and things like that. Like, you got to keep everything in order, man, because like at the end of the day, you're processing or managing people's, not managing people's money, but at least your systems are right.
Mm-hmm.
So with that said, I had to follow and understand kind of where were the, let's say, little like opportunity spaces in the banking law and how I could use the existing banking law into regulating a model that hadn't been seen before. And that's what I had to do, man. Like, literally understand the banking law, read it, work with my team, and make it safe so that my customers would trust what I was doing. And then also even banks will be comfortable in working with me. And then eventually, like, after all that was formed, go up to the regulator and say like, hey, here I am, I'm operating, I want to become, supervised. And that's essentially what I did. Like, we ended up having 2 registration numbers with the banking superintendency of Panama. We're essentially similar to what is known as like a e-money issuer and then a card issuer processor. And that's kind of like the 2 ways in terms of how my company is being supervised and regulated today. And that took 2 years, man, to essentially get there. So, yeah, I guess in summary, that was what we did and what had to be done to also leave like a good mark, right? And I think that's kind of what we wanted to do is show the example of how things could be done when no one had done it, and then kind of leave the path behind in terms of how these things should become regulated in this country without necessarily having to break your mind creating a new law and things like that, right?
And I think that there's a lot of people that are kind of following a market. They are following an existing model, but it's a completely different process to go from 0 to 1 when you are literally reinventing the wheel. How did you methodically go about that? And like, how did you navigate that unknown to have a product that you're like visualizing, imagining the end goal, but how did you like create that process when there's no roadmap to follow?
It was hard, man. I guess for me, what it helped was understanding what existed and then what I had to kind of transform or reapply. So I think for anyone that is trying to do that in whatever space, first thing you got to do is like know the space that you want to build in. And it's funny because even friends from let's say college or whatever, when they knew I was starting and they were like maybe thinking about applying to a fintech company and things like that, they would ask me like, "Hey, Juan Diego, if I want to like learn more about fintech, like where should I like read? Like what type of references and things should I be like looking for?" And he said, "Man, if you want to be good in fintech, learn banking." Straight up, like that's what I said. And I think at the end of the day, like it comes to what I was saying before. Fintech, yeah, it's technology, it's things that you can learn. The best way of learning is actually starting to do it or working at a place that's, somewhat involved in that space. And that's what I did before. Like I used to work in payment processing. And that's where I learned everything with like Visa, MasterCard, banking processes, how to like settle money, all these sort of things. Um, but what allowed me to then apply that knowledge into, the tropicalization of the model here was actually understanding the banking law and how banks work and where the interest, for bankers into like venturing into this model and how to manage the risk involved in these type of business models. And that's kind of where it became natural to me. And being honest, it was like a lot of trial and fail, man, to be honest. Like it wasn't perfect at the beginning. It took a lot of time, but I guess that's kind of the right formula, right? Like if you gotta know, where you're competing, know where you're gonna be, hustling every day. And it's really about like, I guess, an evolution of yourself and your company, right? Like you gotta know your environment to then adapt, to then evolve, right? And I think it's a lot like that. Like when you're doing that 0 to 1, you gotta be the fittest to survive, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why, like, how does the financial ecosystem work here in Panama? Why are there so many banks here?
Oof. Um, it's a mix of things. So you have a country that, from its origin, even before it was a republic, already the gold from the California gold rush was passing through here. You literally had merchants and pirates crossing merchandise and gold through like the jungle back in the 1800s and whatever, right? And when you look at a country like that, where it's been very commerce involved from its beginning, where it's in a way a rite of passage for commercial transactions, commercial interaction to occur, you have a country that's, small, yes, geographically, but it plays a big role in terms of how it works at a regional or even international level. And I think historically, that's what has positioned Panama into becoming, I guess, a big place in terms of how financial services are offered. Um, Also, a big part of it is the use of the US dollar, right? So, because of that history, the canal, the US involvement in the canal originally, and how that was kind of a part of our history in terms of how we became a republic, um, that facilitated banks, even a lot of US banks, to be set up here for serving companies that were crossing the canal, or companies that dealt with the cargo movement and all these sort of things.
Interesting.
And that allowed, kind of create the base for a country in Latin America that offered a stable currency to operate in, stable currency that allowed you to make transactions without the FX risk with other LATAM countries or other countries outside LATAM to move cargo or whatever. And eventually that created a benefit for just people to run businesses here, create businesses that served the local market, but also, internationally, clients or whatever that in some way or form have to deal with Panama, not just from the logistic standpoint, but also from like a more financial. And we are, an extension, a little bit of what a U.S. bank can offer, and the banking law was really good in that sense, that allowed kind of the financial services industry here to like professionalize to a level that's honestly pretty good, like in terms of how you can manage securities, US accounts, like even but if you want to buy and invest in like indexes, not just NASDAQ or like the US stock market, but like here you have access to all financial markets through the banks that offer accounts here, right? So not all countries in LATAM have that, right? And it's in a way, an access to the US banking system without necessarily being in the US. So I think that's what like really made this kind of industry grow. But it's all because of like how Panama even began to exist, right? And a lot of the role that we play as a country in, I guess, the overall, both regional and international sense of the type of country that we are, right? We're a country that provides services, not just locally, but really at an international and regional level. So yeah, I guess, if you want to do that, you need a good banking system,
Right.
right? So
How did you get into all this?
that's a good question. um, it's a mix, man. I was born into an entrepreneur family. My father was a banker. I was pretty much raised in a way to become a banker. Um, and I always grew up with a chip of wanting to build something, right? Like almost what it was expected of me. Being in a Latin American entrepreneur family business, right? Like I was put to work, or like started working when I was 15, man. Like my dad gave me responsibilities, took me to meetings, like really gave and put me in that exposure to learn very quickly. And at the same time, I didn't necessarily want to do banking. Like I didn't want to follow, the, let's say, classical route of, going to college in the US, interning at JP Morgan or Morgan Stanley, becoming an investment banker, working there for 5 years, then come back, helping the family business, or start or work at an investment bank here, right? And that's like usually the usual route. And it's not necessarily a bad one, but I didn't see myself going through that route. So I knew I wanted to build something on my own. I like technology. I didn't know much about it. I really kind of like went knee deep into it in during college and like starting to learn about the future and how a lot of these technologies were going to affect, different industries and things like that. And because of that banking background and that interest, I eventually fell into working in payment processing. And that to me was kind of like my aha moment, where I was doing something without previous experience and I was doing it really well and like really quickly. It became natural to me. And I knew like, man, this is where I kick ass. Right? Like it was a little bit like that. So once I was doing that, um, I figured out that I needed to build something in this space, right? And that's kind of where, I guess the rest of the story took me here.
You said in the beginning or in the early days when you were like 15, your dad was already taking you to meetings. What were some of those early lessons that you got from that early exposure to business?
Discipline, man, for sure. Knowing that not every moment is good, not every moment is bad, and knowing that only your discipline allows you to go from the bad to the good or better. Um, and yeah, man, it was seeing my dad work from a very early age, being exposed to managing, little things, but still having responsibility. I started working at a gift shop in one of the hotels that my family owns in the Pacific, so like an hour away from the city. And I kind of in the middle of working in the hotel, I found my way into doing something that was more interesting to me than just like going from department to department, because he really wanted me to learn about operations and like how things worked on a day-to-day basis, right? Not just on like high administrative level. And I was bored, man. I was like, I'm not learning anything here. Like this is already what I know, whatever. being a selfish kid, 15. And eventually I found my way into like learning that the gift shop wasn't producing money. And I guess that was kind of the environment. Like I had to find my way into doing something interesting, but still like complying with the rules of my family, right? And like working in the summer. So I told my dad, like, hey, what if I run the gift shop and I actually make the gift shop profitable? And if I can make the gift shop profitable, you have to give me 10% of the earnings.
Ah,
And he was like, okay, do it. And dude, I was 15. I had to like learn about, how to deal with providers, how to like, why is this bathing suit not selling? Why, people, old people like to buy Speedos, like, like literally things like that. All right. And like, how much margin could I place on a pack of cigarettes, depending on the, um, depending on the clientele that the hotel was having in that time, or like that for some curiosity, Canadians really like to buy like souvenirs, and like how you had to. I swear to God, this is funny, but like this is a reality, man. And this is what I was selling.
ah,
Like one of the first things that I did, I just noticed that the snacks were running out very quickly on a daily basis in the gift shop. And what I noticed is that the employees like to buy the kind of soda, like to buy the Doritos and things like that that they couldn't necessarily get from the, I guess, what was like the communal kitchen for the employees in the hotel, because it's like a big resort, right? We're talking about like 400 employees on site and things like that. And I was like, this is simple. I just have to, order more Doritos, order more cans of soda. And like I took certain things out, and it took me like 3 months in that process. And I started figuring out and I started making money. But during that process, at the same time, I learned that the girl that was working in the register was stealing money from me. And I had to fire someone at like 16, right?
holy shit.
So
That's a sick experience, though.
it's crazy, man. But like it was bizarre, but it was great. It made me understand like negotiation, made me understand like planning, made me understand that like, how to build an Excel sheet on your own, to understand like what assets you have in your company, how you're gonna make money, how to also like be open to lose margin on certain things because they're not gonna sell and you need to get out of it, right? Or whatever. And yeah, man, I think running a store is like a really good like training um process for anyone who wants to like actually build a business. It's simple, it's not the hardest thing to manage. It makes money if ran well, and it's gonna give you like that real life experience, right? Like selling to people, but at the same time learning how to deal with providers, learning how to like literally fix things at the last minute. Like this is a funny story, but um so there was like a period in during summer where a lot of schools from Colombia were celebrating like their I guess high school graduation. So you had like a month and a half of time in the hotel that was just booked with like high schoolers celebrating their graduation.
No way.
Yeah. And this
Must
is
have
like
been mayhem.
large, dude, you have no idea.
Yeah.
It was insane. Like and it was like a big like tourism company in Colombia that made these like package deals with us. And dude, they had like reggaetoneros, and like it was like a party like 24/7 in the hotel. And I knew that like one of the things that made most money during those weeks were cigarettes, right? Because like kids are, in the pool, in the club, open bar 24/7, like they're smoking down cigarettes like crazy, right? And I I was like literally in like on a Friday finishing school or whatever, and the girl that ran the shop calls me and says like, "Hey, we only have one like big pack of it's called like a rifle in Panama. It's like, the large pack that they sell in the airport that has like
Yeah.
I think it's like 24 of them."
Yeah, carton.
And he's like, "We only have one carton. What are we gonna do? The provider is not gonna like doesn't have any more until like a week." I'm like, "Damn, like that's money, man. I can't lose that." And I literally had to tell my dad, like, I need to go to the hotel. I need to restock my cigarette inventory for this weekend where like all these kids are arriving. I'm not gonna like go back home. So I went from school, I drove to the beach, and I went like to every little shop across like the beach towns around. And I was like 16, 17, man, with like cash. And I was literally telling the right, like, how many like cartons do you have? We have 6. Give it all. Literally, man. And I came back, put all that stuff in my car, came back and like packed, the store with like 24 cartons.
No
And I was set for the week.
No
Right? And I sold out on all of them.
No
Right? So like you had to, it gave me that like mindset of like, hey, you gotta solve quickly, right? Or whatever, if you have a problem like that. So yeah, man, I guess that's like a little funny anecdote, but yeah, those were the things that I was doing in the middle of high school.
Yeah, it's a sick story and
Yeah.
unbelievable exposure to get at such a young age. Like,
Yeah,
you're,
sure.
especially with a store, I think there's a lot of people that make emotional decisions, like running a retail store. But
Yeah.
if you're really paying attention to the numbers, like it seems like you were, and making
Yeah.
those data-driven decisions, like it's a super cool, like small case study to learn how
Yeah.
a business operates.
It is. I recommend it for anyone that has the opportunity. And yeah, it's fun, man. Like, there's little stories and whatever, and like having those, I guess, things to solve in that age. It was funny. And obviously I stayed the night, I partied, right? Like it was not bad.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Final question. What do you think, being involved in this financial ecosystem, and seeing the whole landscape, what is the coolest advancement, or where do you find intellectual interest within the space? Like, what's the most intellectually stimulating thing for you that's going on right now?
Oof. I gotta say that at least 3 times a week, I'm thinking about stablecoins. That's kind of what is keeping me up at night.
What is that?
Stablecoins is essentially crypto that's asset backed.
Gotcha.
That's why it's called a stablecoin. So things like USDC, USDT, they're essentially backed with US dollar reserves, and it gives you like a one-to-one security that is not going to fluctuate. Some of these stable coins, fluctuate a little bit, but it's like, 1.0012 for like $1, things like that. Like very minimal exchange.
Volatility.
Yeah, exactly. And the reason why I'm looking so much into it and learning into the space of it is because on the fintech side, a lot of what I do on a regular basis, and companies and entrepreneurs in this space, they have to be thinking about it, man. Because structurally speaking, like, it's not just about operating in the financial system and then having an exposure into this world and kind of being a middleman or like a facilitator or an enabler in the middle. But now it's becoming more of like, okay, I gotta be embedded into it, right? It's not just like I provide a service and that's it. No, it's like I have to start actually having operations in both sides of the, I guess, industry, and really being an enabler that has everything embedded. And that is where I think is the most fascinating, and where a lot of opportunity is gonna come. And it's gonna change, man, how transactions are run, how payment settlements are done, how the cost of everything is being done, even like the automations that you can do, even like, for treasury management and all these sort of things are gonna become easier. So there's like so much in the space, man, that I can't tell you for sure. But like, you have a company like Stripe buying Bridge for I think it was like $1 billion, and Bridge is a stablecoin operator, and you have like one of the biggest payment processors in the US buying a stablecoin company. So that says something, right? Like, so they're thinking about it. I'm in a group with other YC founders, and they were just talking about like striped sessions that were going down in San Francisco. And literally, you had one of the founders of Stripe talking about like stable coins and AIs, what's next? And it's a mix of both. Like if you're not mixing that in some way or form,
Gonna get left behind.
and you're gonna be left behind. Yeah.
Right.
So
Yeah, it's super cool.
yeah.
I'm a newbie, but it's
worries.
very interesting.
Oh yes, it was great talking about it. I know I get a little bit too technical sometimes.
No, it's great. I like the technicality and getting into the granularity. That's like the best way to learn for me, is to get, first that bird's eye view, but then understanding how the different pieces are moving. And obviously it's difficult to cover everything in a 30-minute conversation,
For sure.
but it inspires some like curiosity within the space.
That's good, man. I'm glad I was able to cause that effect.
If people want to reach out to you or they're interested in your services, where can they find you?
Well, you can reach out to our website, www.paycaddy.com. That's pay, CADDY.com. You can find me in LinkedIn as well, PayCaddy or Juan Diego Gálvez. And yeah, shoot me a DM in LinkedIn. I try to respond very quickly. Yeah, you can get in contact with me through that way.
All right, man. I appreciate you coming on.
No worries, man. Thanks, man.